Okay, it's about 8:31, and it is Wednesday, November the 21st, 2018, the day before Thanksgiving. Welcome to week 8 of Introduction to Corrections. And this quarter is wrapping up pretty soon. In fact, you'll have one more lecture. That will be 2 weeks from now. And again, I do want to remind each of you that as you go through this holiday weekend, make sure you get your assignments completed on time. And I'm going to go over the requirements of the assignments for this week right about now. So let me start by sharing my screen. Okay. The one thing I do want to remind you is that I see some of you keep continuing to lose points because not because you're not doing research, but because you're not providing citations in the body of the paper. The APA requirement is citations in the body and references at the end. Many of you provide references at the end, but no citations, so you lose 5 points. So I've been saying this from day one, very important that you do so. And then some of you are continuously battling with the issue of Grammarly. I have referred several students to Tutor Match for tutoring. You need to follow through on that. Also, you need to make sure that you get that corrected, running your papers through Grammarly, checking the plagiarism box so that you can make sure that your percentage is lower than 25%. And that's an issue that's ongoing with a few of you, and it needs to be corrected in order for you to get your grades. Increasing your critical thinking in your papers will automatically take care of that problem as long as you do continue to give citations in the body and references at the end. But that will correct the Grammarly issue. And so you can see that we have all our lectures down here from the previous weeks, and that tonight at the end of this, I will include week 8 lecture. So let's look and see what we have going for week 8. In week 8, we deal with the issue of parole. And I'm going to comment a little bit about parole. But to prepare for that, you were given the PowerPoints for chapters 7, 8, and 9 of your text, and you were to have read those as well. And then look at the activities, defining parole and its issues, and then a conversation with the parole officer. That's what we'll use to conclude tonight's session. Then finally, your discussion posts, your initial post, parole violations and the officer's role. You will should have submitted that by Tuesday, which was the 20th, by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then your reply post, of course, is due normally, as it always is, this Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Finally, complete the assignment, why parolees fail and what can be done, and then complete the quiz. Remember, the quiz is timed, and I've encouraged you to make sure that you try to do the quiz at the end of the week. A few of you have jumped right off into it, and your scores would be much higher after you've gone through the information and materials for the week. Pay close attention to the grading rubric in order to maximize your points. So let's quickly take a look at the course calendar that we have here. And let's go to it. Here we go. And here we are right here. Your reading assignment, you click on that. It tells you what sections to read. And then your initial post, that was due Tuesday. Your lecture that's taking place right now. And then your reply post due the 24th, which is Saturday. And then your 2 written assignments, your quiz and your written assignment, which I'm going to go over by going over the rubric. And then next week, you will have written assignment, reading, written assignment, your reply post, and then we're getting into December, the last month, a written assignment, and then your course project that'll be due for your final. So, all right. So let's go to Module 8, parole. Before I do talk about that, I do want to remind you that your course project, those of you who have submitted your interview, which was the 3rd part of the 4-part project, I will be grading those over the weekend, and you should have those back. But this is the one time, if you paid close attention to the rubric, that you did not have to have references at the end. You did have to have citations. And, you know, a student once asked me, how do I cite the interview? Very simply, who you're interviewing and, you know, the details, the interview, you know, whoever you're interviewing and the agency, in parentheses, and, you know, the year, 2018, the same way you do other citations. All right? So now let's take a look at the assignments again quickly for this week. Why parolees fail, and it's a 2-page paper. Explain 2 or 3 of the top reasons. Make sure you conduct research. APA format is required. You know what that is. If you need assistance, go to the online library, which provides a place for sources, reliable sources, not Wikipedia. Okay, and so then let's take quickly a look at the rubric. It says Sunday, November 25th, which I previously stated. And here is the rubric. This is the key to getting a good grade. There we go. So 60% of your grade comes from doing this, making sure that you have the right amount of pages with the details, and then meets the 2-page minimum requirement, paragraphs. Don't just write one long paragraph. And then APA title page, reference page, and then all sources cited in the body of the paper. Okay, and it mentions that you don't use Wikipedia, as I said before. You do that, you'll get your 25 points. Okay, and then the only other thing that's in there is your discussion post. There it is right there. And then your quiz, which is, I said, it's a time quiz. All right, so now let's go to the lessons tab, where we'll finish up here, lesson content. And it always starts out by listing the objectives, and we know we're talking about parole. And so I'm going to talk about parole boards and how they operate and what takes place there. Again, we're going to deal with that and then conclude with a conversation with a parole officer that you'll be able to take a look at as well. So let's talk about paroles. So what is parole? As you know, of the 4 areas that involve corrections: probation, prison, jail, there's parole. And parole is akin to probation. The difference is with parole, you have been incarcerated and then you are released early because you performed well while you were in prison, and you're given the opportunity to finish the remainder of your sentence outside of prison. And that's what happens with parole. And in those situations, states vary. Some have even done away with the term parole. Some call it early release. Some call it other things. But it gives you a chance to finish under the supervision. Now, your parole officer that you are assigned to, first of all, number one, the parole decision is made by the parole board itself. It's usually a panel or a set-up institution within each state, and the individual is brought before the parole board to present reasons why they should be granted parole, and then the state or the prosecution has an opportunity to oppose that parole or agree with that parole. At the same time, individuals who were victims, family members of the victim, survivors, could come in and provide testimony or offer reasons why the individual should or should not receive parole. And so, assuming that that person is granted parole by the parole board, there are conditions that generally are laid out, and as a result, those conditions are provided to the parole officer or parole agent, and that individual is required to report to that parole officer, keep up to date with the address, location, to stay away from felons, not possess firearms, not possess drugs, and all of those different kinds of things. Now, there are some jurisdictions now that have allowed individuals to get their voting rights back, and that's changing. I always thought that voting rights should be given back to an individual after they are released from prison, and so that's sometimes a condition. Now, if you leave the state or the jurisdiction, you have to get permission from your parole officer. Now, there are times when the individual would be visited by the parole officer, a surprise, either at employment, at their home. That individual then is under the supervision as long as that that individual is under the sentence. So if they have 4 years and they release 2, the next 2 years they would remain under the supervision of the parole officer. Now, the parole officer can return individuals back to prison if they violate any of the conditions. For example, if they're out too late, if they are not following what is written in the document. And certainly the parolee, the person who is paroled, receives that information, so they're made aware of the requirements that they must satisfy in order to complete it. Now, parole officers as a whole generally don't like to send individuals back to prison because it's not good for them. But if a parolee continues to violate the rules, then in that instance, then they will be sent back. And so that's how parole operates. So now parole in many jurisdictions has operates differently, determined by the type of sentencing. So if you have indeterminate sentencing or mandatory sentencing, which is determinate sentencing, they vary. And so in the situation where there's indeterminate sentencing, then that individual could be given parole within that period of time that they qualify parole within that sentence. In the mandatory sentencing, there is oftentimes a time when the individual qualifies for parole. However, remember the key thing is qualify for parole. They had to have satisfied the conditions that I stated earlier. And like I said, the board has control and can revoke the matter based upon the individual not satisfying the requirements of parole. If an individual does violate, there is a petition that is filed by the parole officer called a VOP, which stands for violation of parole. There is also a VOP that's called violation of probation, but the P stands for probation. But since we're talking about parole, so the petition is filed. The individual is given a copy of that document, and they have the opportunity to present their side of the story, provide witnesses or an opportunity to be heard, any evidence that supports their position, why they should not be considered as violating the conditions of parole. And they can cross-examine the witnesses, and that the board will hear the evidence. Now, be aware that the basis for evidence in criminal cases is beyond a reasonable doubt. But in parole hearings, it's like in a civil case, preponderance of the evidence. Now, remember this, even if there is a determination that the individual violated, then the option is not necessarily always to send the person back to prison, but there could be things such as putting additional conditions on the probation, giving that person a second chance, depending on the seriousness of the violation. Certainly, I always tell people that if the violation has to do with drugs, one of the conditions that should be in there is that the individual participate in drug treatment and should report. Now, if that person, of course, refuses to report, that could be a violation. But even if it's not a violation for them to report, what could happen is if it's determined that they're not supposed to be using drugs, that would be a violation, and that could be adequate enough to send them back. So the key thing is that you want to try to help the individual, but the individual has some responsibility as well. Very few parolees think that they don't need a parole officer or think that they can they know better than the parole officer. Very few, very few. The biggest issue is one of the violations that take place, and drugs and alcohol are usually one of them. Sometimes it's committing a criminal offense, and then, of course, you know what happens then. That person is prosecuted for the criminal offense and then sent back to serve the rest of their time for the previous offense in jail, and then as long with the other. So if that person comes up for parole next time, it's going to be harder for them to get parole. So I've talked about the jobs of the parole officer, but the key goal is for the parole officer to help the individual to reintegrate into the community. So maybe help them with education resources, employment opportunities. There are many second chance programs that are available that parole officers will direct the individual to. There are some who are subjected to what we call intense supervision, where they'll have a monitor and other surveillance. But again, I talked about education, employment, helping them to get life skills to keep them out of trouble, treatment and counseling, and to help them to connect with their families. Now, in the process of staying away from felons, I have heard there are times when the only family members that the individual have are felons. Well, guess what that means? it means that they can't go around those family members because of the fact that it means what it says. And the reason for that is because putting that person in around those kinds of people put them in a position where they would likely violate and end up returning to prison. Remember, parole is good because it lightens decreases the number of individuals in prison, but it also gives that individual a chance to prove that they really were remorseful, that they learned something with the time that they were in there that will benefit them and help them never to be returned or to cut down on the recidivism rate of individuals. Okay, and so I already talked about why individuals fail supervision, and so and it says and concludes here, parole is much more effective when support and programs are offered, such as having a place to live, counseling, and I'm not talking about just drugs and alcohol, but sometimes there's need for mental health counseling, someone to talk to help them to transition back into society. And then I've already talked about employment, social networking, connecting with peers, family, good people, and then oftentimes to help an individual. What does help an individual is connecting with a social organization in the community and or a local church that will help them. And the pastors oftentimes are good, but they also have men's groups within the church that can help individuals who are on parole. And that's the system for parole. Now I want to, for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to disconnect my mic. And I'm going to deactivate keep my audio connected. Okay. Let's go. My name is Lance Cover with the Department of Corrections. Start with Department of Corrections in 1995. Probation officer, working with adult misdemeanors and juvenile misdemeanor felons, whatnot. Do that position for many years, working county supervisor, probation officer, working mainly with adults, so adults. Do that for many years before I took the transition of my work now as a supervisor and CIP, college preservation program. And both programs are the equivalency of parole. These people have been to prison and are serving the remainder of their prison sentence in the community. That is correct. All the clients I work with have been sentenced to prison, served their time in prison, have been released on their remain to the remaining third and super community. However, on the CIP program or college preservation program, those individuals are referred as inmates to the working off their prison sentence. Okay. Okay, so what does that mean, that you get everybody who comes out of prison
prison in order to participate in this boot camp?
That's correct. I am a supervisor release agent now. My primary, I work mainly and only with people released from prisons.
Okay, what are the qualifications to do your position?
The qualifications to be a what's called a corrections agent are a 4-year degree in corrections or an equivalent background such as sociology, psychology, also an internship of 400 hours or equivalent work such as including prison investigations, case management. We might look at other types of employment such as case manager within the institution and other case management type jobs within the community in other social work type jobs in the state.
Is there a typical day for you?
Yes. Some days are very typical. You wake up, you get dressed, you check your vehicle, all of our contacts, all of our workers in the community. We operate out as a supervisor release agent. We work out of the car. The car is set up like an office. It has a laptop. It looks like a lot like a squad car. We review the previous days from the last time you worked current notes that were in. We put it on all clients. I have a lot of times a to-do list that never seems to go away, and just gets longer and longer each day. Review that, and then basically start setting up a contact list of the people I'm going to see for that day. Then load up my car, check my vehicle before I leave, and then get out onto the road.
So once you're on the road, are visits typical home because you're at their home, correct?
In their home, workplaces, and any place that they talk to an agent about. Could be a community service site, could be a support group meeting.
Okay. So what might happen at a visit?
In a typical home contact, an agent will into the residence, you would walk through the residence to make sure that everything is status quo. There's nothing out of the ordinary going on. Once that has been established, you start to work on basically the housekeeping things. What conditions have you met to this point? The standard conditions, a lot of work we went through community service treatment, things like that. We discuss those housekeeping things. Then we start looking at case management, looking at things that the clients are interested in some of their high-risk needs and areas, and start addressing some of those needs and start planning for the future. Addressing some of the problems they've had in the past in order to prevent those from being problems in the future.
Okay, so are there ever like violation issues or safety issues for you?
Absolutely. Every day is a safety issue, not only for us, the whole of our clients, their peers and associates within the home, but also for us and for a lot of people, like people from the community surrounding the community. I have to spend a lot of time in North Minneapolis, which I think a lot of people are aware of, very significant area for violence. So you always have to have situational awareness in regards to what's going on around you. We are trained in agency training courses in order to reduce the incidence of incidents. To reduce the incidence of safety issues with agents, not putting yourself in a position where a client has locked in the escalation skills because there's something going south or something certainly bad. You're able to work that through the manner that escalates the problem down to hopefully a lower level.
Okay. We've talked about release of offenders and some of the barriers and issues that they face. Do you see that with the population you work with?
Yes. These individuals have gone to prison with not much care to their lives. They don't have 401k plans. They don't have retirement plans. They haven't had. Some of them say we even work a job for any length of time whatsoever. And so when they're
you help with those issues also?
I do. I do. Not necessarily directly with the clients in regards to their individual housing needs, but we are always in search of a better housing in the areas that we supervise. That is one of our mission statements. That's one of our goals as agents is to find suitable housing for clients on a regular basis. Those individuals who don't otherwise have housing in the community. There are a lot of programs out there, especially in the metro areas, that are willing to help us.
Okay. Touched on violations earlier, but we've talked about the violation process, and it's a little bit different than going to court. Can you talk about the hearing process and maybe your role as an agent during that process?
An agent plays a dual role in that process. Although the agent in the home working with the client to assist them in their facilitation of a better life, when it comes to a violation, in a hearing, an agent becomes a prosecutor. And in that the hearing is set up typically at jail. So let's start from the beginning. If an agent comes into a situation and the client is found in a violation situation, an ISR agent does carry handcuffs. And at that point, they make determination as to whether or not they're going to place that person in custody. They can do it themselves or call for backup from local law enforcement, which is always advised. In most situations, as ISR, I tend to work the situation myself because that's not been too much of a problem for me so far. But anyway, when the violation occurs, the client is placed in custody. A warrant is issued for their arrest through the officer of the day. That is placed in the I typically transport the client to the local jail. At that point, we establish a warrant based on that violation, any other violation that may be out there. That report is submitted to Minnesota Department of Corrections here in Rasmussen and the State Public Defender's Office. A hearing is scheduled, and those three parties come together: the client, the hearings and release officer, and the public defender. The agent is also aware and acts as the prosecutor for the prosecutor. They present the evidence to show that the client has violated their conditions of release. The defense attorney, of course, defends the client, and then the hearing officer weighs the decision to determine whether or not there's been a preponderance of evidence to show that that client has violated their conditions of release, and if they have, whether or not the violation is sufficient enough to send them back to the institution, restructure them or dismiss. Restructure would be at conditions addressing the fact that there was a violation, finding that there is a suitable cause to put accountability in place, or to put other aspects in place, such as the client using drugs may be considered for a evaluation of possible further treatment program in the system and that behavior.
So sometimes intermediate sanctions can be used instead of reincarceration.
Intermediate sanctions are agents will have at their disposal in the field, and what they'll do is it acts like a revocation within the institution, but without the hearing officers. The agent will ask the client if they're willing to participate in this program, and then at that point, the client may be willing to engage in those things that we talked about in the restructure, such as further chemical dependency programming, an intermediate sanction that would be a loss of privileges, may even volunteer to go on to an electronic monitor to address accountability issues.
Okay. And you mentioned the hearing officer. Is that like a parole board in other states?
It would be like, I think a parole board would be set up more in a factor of having multiple individuals at a table evaluating a person's adjustment to the institution. I think it's more like a judge. In this particular case, I would equate it more to the judge's role. They weigh both sides of the evidence from the defense attorney lays out their side of the story, the client lays out his information, and then the probation officer, parole officer, ISR agent lays out their violation. The hearing officer slash when I was the judge, takes all that information and determines whether or not that person is in violation or not. Okay. And the second is a resolution comes after that from that hearing officer slash judge. Okay. It's an administrative position. Okay. It's called an administrative hearing. Okay.
Do you have advice for students today who are interested in this field?
This is, as everybody knows, the community, the state is suffering significant losses in revenue. And jobs are hard to find in the field. My best advice for people who are coming in the field is volunteer. Get into the agencies, do pre-sentence investigations, do case management, work with kids, get to know people in the field. Once you're in the field, have a good idea of what it is that you want to do in the field, and be an innovator. I think 20 years from now, it might not look the same way it did 20 years ago. So I suspect what we're going to be looking at is technology, how we can bring that to the forefront. How those individuals coming into the field can be an asset to that agency, not necessarily somebody who wants to sit behind the desk all day or who wants to just collect a paycheck to do a job so that they can, and collect a paycheck to do the job to do what they want to do elsewhere. So those who really love the job will really do something to that agency that are really going to make a difference in how we see corrections in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Very good interview. Few points to note. You see what he talked about in terms of the requirement for the job itself, a minimum of a bachelor's degree. And you also should be aware of the fact that this is not a desk job. This is not something that you sit at a desk. You're in the field if you pay close attention to what he was saying. In fact, they have a mobile office usually, which is the car that's equipped with the computer and all the information that's necessary to help them complete their daily assignments. Also, you'll note something else that's very important, and that is that the parole officer, as I stated earlier, is not have real interest in sending you back to prison, but they can use intermediate things, such as they mentioned about the drug issue. The key thing that they want to do is to help you to become successful if you're a parolee, help you to, again, matriculate back into society and to be more productive. And some other advice that I've given to many students, and that is because of the tightness of the budget and the economy, you can be good, you can still get a job, but start, as he says, by volunteering. I have encouraged students in this program that when they take classes that allow them to get into the field, to go out and do hands-on studies and meet people, get to know people, learn how they do their jobs, and letting them know who you are, letting them know that you're a student in a criminal justice program at Rasmussen College, letting them know that you're an individual whose interest is parole in this instance. And that's how you learn. I talked about this in contemporary issues of criminal justice class that I teach, about how important it is to make yourself known, and how the thing that helped me to matriculate up the ladder in law was my job in a law firm, starting in the mailroom and working my way up. Well, that's the key thing you want to do in any position, but when you're talking about parole officers, you want to, first of all, get to know some parole officers. Don't just go online and find the information. Actually go and meet some people, meet parole officers, talk to them about their jobs, what they do, and ask if there's some things you can volunteer to help them with. And they will be very happy to accept assistance. So guess what? When when you get ready to apply for a position, you can use them as a reference. You can also become familiar with those. And so, of course, though, the other thing is obtain your education, get your grades up, keep them up. Consistently being on the honor roll and dean's list is a plus, and it will generally help you in being able to obtain and land a job. And so that's all I have for today. Parole is a very interesting area. It gives you a chance to, because you're going to be a counselor, you're going to be a social worker, you're going to be like a law enforcement officer, almost like a bounty hunter. You're gonna have a myriad of things that you do, and your job's going to vary depending on the individuals that you're working with. And I think it's a plus for you when you're in that field to have an individual to turn their life around and demonstrate by your assistance and help and the resources that you know that have helped an individual to be a non-recidivist and to matriculate into society and change their direction in your life. And so with that, I'm going to close this session on parole. I'm going to wish each of you a happy Thanksgiving. Don't eat too much turkey. Don't watch too much football. I will be watching my Bears. Go Bears, and whoever your team is. And my team is playing the first game, national, on tomorrow. So I will be watching them. And so I will not be with you next week. Next week is week 9. I will return in week 10 with another lecture. In the meantime, next week, you can keep your eye out for your ACAT code and instructions about the ACAT. Remember that I don't handle the ACAT. I just provide you the information. It's a school requirement, and you want to complete that assessment so that you will get it. Now, remember, the ACAT is not the same as your week 11 assessment that you do at the very end. It is 2 different ones. All right. So anyway, I'm going to say good night to you at this time. Have a great weekend. And again, happy Thanksgiving.